Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This is our third week of the Sewell Leadership Live. We are so honored to have you join in this morning. Unfortunately, for many of us, we have a little more free time than we had ever hoped for. But I do hope that you're using this free time in an amazing way. I've seen as I've driven around my neighborhood and I've driven throughout the community that there are more people walking, there are more time spending time with family. And who knows, maybe in this season of fear and tragedy that we all have experienced at many levels, maybe at the same time, this is a chance for us to really reconnect to the things that really matter, not just for ourselves and our community, but for our world and our eternity. I'm grateful this morning. My friend Andy Andrews is joining us from Orange Beach, Alabama. He and I traded sunrises this morning over the phone, and it's just an absolutely a beautiful morning where both of us are. Andy came and spoke at our leadership event a few years ago, so many of you may have seen him when he was live in Odessa. And I reached out to him and I said, listen, we just really need your help. You or not only have a podcast, Andy, called The Professional Noticer, but you also have really just been known as someone who can take what all of us may see one way and give us an entirely new perspective on what life could really look like and how we could really perceive what we see. And so with that said, Andy, we're so grateful to have you with us this morning. You could have been lots of places. You could have been at home watching that sunrise still, but instead you chose to join us.
The governor says that actually I could not have been lots of places. So,
well, I suppose you're true. I suppose you either had to be at home or at your essential place of work, which is in your studio.
Man, I'm glad to be here with you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Listen, Andy, in the past, we've kind of done this where I let people speak and then ask questions at the end. But if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you just a couple of questions, if I could.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy having conversation.
Awesome. Well, Andy, it's interesting. All of us have been told what or how we need to lead during a crisis. But I'd love to see if maybe you could help us understand of why leading through a crisis is so much more difficult.
It is, by the way, leading during a crisis, it absolutely is more difficult. However, it can be much more rewarding. It's more difficult because the normal things that you do as a leader, or the normal leadership things that we do, they still work. But during a crisis, you will definitely find the things that you're not as good at. You'll find the areas of your leadership knowledge that is lacking. I mean, they will become very familiar very quickly. And in a way, that's a good thing, right? I mean, long term, that is a good thing, because there's so many times that we feel like we got it covered. We know what we're doing there. But there's an old line that Mark Twain used once. He said, "It's not the things that you don't know that'll get you. It's the things you absolutely know for sure that'll mess you up." And so leadership is a lot like that. And so there is an opportunity here to learn how to really lead people who are scared, who are mad, who, every emotion that a human being has in a crisis, that emotion, it just ramps up. They love so much more. They're angrier than they ever have been, and they're more fearful. It's just all these things that really ramp up. And if there's ever time to lead, it's now. And I'm aware that we probably have a lot of people on watching right now who might in their mind be kind of going, whew, I'm glad I'm not in leadership. I'm glad I'm not a leader person. But I hate to disappoint you, but oh yes, you are. I mean, if you have anybody that you really care about, anybody that you love, if you have something that you believe that you know that people need, you need to figure out the leader thing. All right, because we're going to be leading people to a place of betterment in their lives, or we'll just allow them to continue along a pathway that we know is not going to be great. And so you've got a great opportunity to be an influence in your neighborhood, an influence online, an influence on social media. And oh my God, does social media ever need an influence? So this is a scary time, but it's also a time that you can see a lot of benefit from.
You know, Andy, a friend of mine made a statement a few years ago to me. He said, Collin, there are no neutral moments. In other words, when you talk about leadership, it's not like at this moment I get to lead and that moment I don't get to lead. Because leadership, as our friend John Maxwell said, is influence. And then it's interesting. He said that the most introverted person in the world will actually influence over 10,000 people in their lifetime. So even the person who says, I'm not a leader, I'm so shy, I can barely speak in public. Sometimes I think we think of leaders as somebody who is, you know, this big verbose person that talks a lot and has a lot to offer. But sociologists say the most introverted person in the world influences 10,000 people in their life.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And there's the butterfly effect story, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Andy, you were talking about a minute ago about people were so probably fearful right now. And I've said in the past that we really make decisions from two perspectives. We either make decisions out of faith, and that can either be faith in God because we're people of those beliefs, or faith even that things are going to be better tomorrow than they are today. So we either make decisions out of faith or we make decisions out of fear. So do you have any advice for people? What would you say to someone who's really gripped or dealing with fear right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, faith and fear are a lot the same. They're cut from the same cloth, but they're opposite ends of the bolt, right? This faith and fear thing, when you look at them, both of them could be defined as believing in something that hasn't happened yet and that you can't see, right? It hadn't happened yet. You can't see it. It's faith and fear. But there is a reward for both. And the reward for fear is more fear. And when people stay fearful long enough, it is like a cancer, and it affects every part of everybody who touches their life. It affects so much. So the reward of fear is just more fear until you're living literally on the brink of insanity. But the reward of faith is to see what you believe, to finally see what you have believed, and to know that your faith was rewarded by what you believed coming to pass. And so to take people and help them understand how to do away with their own fear is something I really believe that you can give somebody an answer, or you can explain it in a way that they can take it and harness it and use it for their own. And so I want to explain fear to you. And this is not just it's not one of these little, F stands for this. Yeah, I want to explain the process, how this happens. And I think this will make sense to you. But fear is nothing in the world but a misuse of the creative imagination that has been placed in you. That's all it is, right? And I can honestly tell you that from all the research that I've done, I firmly believe that the more you tend toward fear in your life, I could look at you and say, okay, well, that's just a smarter person, because smarter people deal with fear more in their lives than dumb people. I guess. Have you seen, you've seen that television show. There's a television show on cable called Jackass. And these people do the craziest things. Apparently, they're not scared of anything. And they don't appear to be very smart to me. Okay, but smart people can get gripped in fear. And here's why. Smart people are more creative. They're more imaginative. And our imagination is another common denominator between faith and fear. It's, how you're going to use that imagination. And so if fear is just a misuse of this creative imagination, and if it does happen more often to smart people, because smart people have greater imaginations, they have greater experience, they have greater insights. And so, smarter people tend to go, well, if this happens, that's going to happen. And of course, that's going to create this. And then we're all going to be like this. And oh my gosh. And Seneca, the great Roman philosopher, said something. He said that we are more likely to be frightened by things than crushed by things, because we can be frightened of something that absolutely never comes to pass. And so when you're looking at fear in your own life, you got to do what my mama used to tell me when I was a little kid. I didn't misbehave a ton, but I did sometimes. And I remember my mom, sometimes she would lean down and she would say, you better get control of yourself right now. And I knew that meant, even though I wanted to misbehave or do what I was doing, I knew, okay, I could stop myself from doing that. Your imagination is just another discipline. Is all it is. And what is discipline? Can you do something you don't necessarily want to do to get a result you would like to have? So, do you want to be fearful? No, you don't want to be fearful. Okay. Then, as the great Roman philosopher Seneca and my mama would say, come on, get control of yourself. You're believing in something that has never happened, may not ever happen. If it does happen, we'll deal with it when it happens. But for now, choose to use your imagination to grow, to figure out differences, because with every, what is it, Newton's law, every action has an opposite equal reaction. Well, the same is true. Collin, you and I have been through, disasters before and recessions before and terrorist attacks before that sunk the economy, and I really, I was talking yesterday to a lady who everybody would recognize this person's name. But I was talking to her about this, about fear, because she said, I'm just like scared to death. And I said, well, what about specifically? She said, nothing specific, I'm just scared. And so I had this talk with her and I said, look, you are imaginative, right? And so you're misusing that imagination. It's all it is. So we can get control of ourselves and we can deal with that fear.
Andy, that's great advice. Thank you. Andy, one of our viewers asked the question, and I'm going to paraphrase it. A lot of times we use the news and media and social media, for that matter, to gain information. Do you have any perspective or advice on how the news impacts our beliefs and the facts versus fueling potentially our faith versus our fear?
Yeah. Once again, we are in control. Now, before this ever happened, I'm telling you, before this virus ever came along, I do not watch the news in the morning. In fact, I don't watch the news. That may just shock some people. I've told people that. I've said, hey, I don't watch the news. And I've had people say, well, how do you know if something's happening? Are you kidding me? I mean, if something bad happens, if it gets bad enough, people fill your text up. I mean, they'll fill your phone up. We live on the northern Gulf Coast, right? And it is kind of weird to us that as soon as some hurricane gets through that gap between Miami and Cuba, and it turns up, people start, are y'all okay? We hope you're safe. And we're like, this thing's, it may not come here. I mean, the chances of it coming here are 1 in a million. Now it's hit a couple of times over the last 50 years, so it is amazing to me how sensationalized the news can be. Now, look, I'm not telling you not to watch the news, but I am telling you this. If you feel like you need information, then get in, get it, and get out. Don't obsess over this. And we have to understand that, if you look at yourself, you know that you want to say and do things and put the coloring on something that will benefit your business, that will benefit your family. I mean, that's just human nature. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? But we have to understand that that also goes for the news networks, right? I mean, statistics show very clearly that the ratings for the news just go up dramatically when there is something crazy happening, when there's a crisis, when there's a disaster, then the ratings go up. Okay, well, when the ratings go up, they charge more for their advertising because they can. And so when the ratings go up, they make more money. And so we have to understand that it just makes sense for them to make it last as long as they can, to wring every drop of panic out of a story, because it's how they make their living. Now, I don't necessarily think they're doing anything wrong, but we don't have to buy into it. But think now, this is why they always say it's a 2% death rate. It's a 2% death rate. The death rate is 30 times. I mean, 2%. And my point is, nobody ever talks about a 98% survival rate.
Yes, sir. So maybe, Andy, the way we could look at this is we should get our news like we do a meal through the drive-through, not as a sit-down meal. We should maybe get our news like we get food from a drive-through.
Boy, that's a great analogy. That's a great analogy. And be aware, if you're going to get your news like you get it through a drive-through, which I think is a great analogy, just be aware of how many times you've driven away and had the wrong thing in your bag.
So you have to give me at least credit for that the first time you use it, and then after that, it's yours. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So see, that's how you do it. That's how speakers do it, Collin. We say, it's like Collin always says, get news like you're going through the drive. And then the next time I use it, I'll say, it's like this guy I know always says, you get your news like you go through the drive. And then the third time I use it, I'll say, it's like I always say.
There you go. Okay. Well, I'll know I at least get it the first time. Okay. Hey, listen, in your book, you've written a lot about this guy, Jones. He was the original noticer. And there's some conversations that I've read and that we've discussed that I think could really help maybe get people to see perspective. So could you help us kind of understand the difference between perception and perspective for us?
Yeah. And that's a great thing to dig into, because I hear both those words misused, and and um, and they provide very different views of something. Okay, so uh, you don't choose a perception; you choose a perspective. But a perception, how you perceive something, is what's happening right now. What you're seeing right now allows you to perceive what has happened. I'm perceiving that we are, that's perception. Perspective sees what is right now and projects its future value. You know, my perspective on this is that while it is bad now, right, that is perspective. And see, perspective is it's so important, because in fact, Jones told me one time, he said that a lot of times in a crisis, and he said, and we always have that, right? That's a normal state of being. And I said, what? He said, well, we're all either in a crisis, coming out of a crisis, or headed to a crisis.
That's right.
That's just part of being with us on this planet. Okay. And he said, you know, in these times of crisis, people are just absolutely panicking for answers. You know, they've got to have an answer. And so, you know, a lot of times they'll shove this square answer into a round hole, and they'll jam it in there, and it doesn't really fit. It's not the best answer, but it's an answer, and, you know, it'll move things along. But if you keep doing that, you know, you go a few years and you've missed the target by a little bit over and over again, you find yourself way past or way beside and way off from the what we would consider life's best. And so this perspective thing, Jones said perspective is more important than answers, because with perspective, you can get answers that are the best. He said, because perspective about a situation leads to calm. Calm leads to clear thinking. Clear thinking yields ideas. And from ideas, we get answers in the proper timing that are the most valuable, that are the best. And so this perspective thing about, you know, we hear people talk about, well, he's a glass half full person, or, you know, he's kind of a glass half empty. And there is that is really, if you look at the glass as a perception, the glass just kind of is what it is. I mean,
yeah,
it's a perspective that you know, your perspective in the half empty, half full thing, you choose that.
that's right.
You get to choose. And we know what the kind of thinking that choosing to think half empty leads to. We know what kind of thinking that choosing to believe it's half full. And it's a very simple example, but you get to choose your perspective. You get to choose whether you believe that you are equipped to come up with another idea. You know, it's an odd thing, Collin, that that crisis brings out the best, the most. You know, it always brings out life-changing inventions and you know, different ways of doing business. And so there will be good that comes from things that we think the worst. How many times have you, if you're listening and watching this today, how many times in your life have you just resisted some change that it looked like was going to happen, and you resisted it with everything you had, with all your power? You tried to avoid it, but it happened anyway. And you thought, oh my God, this is the worst thing that could have ever happened for anybody. And then a year later, you looked back at the situation and go, you know, if that hadn't happened, we would have never in a million years would we have. And so if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here. You know, there was a time that I lived under a pier. for a couple of years of my life. I slept under a pier on the Gulf Coast, and I wouldn't have chosen that in a million years. If my parents had been alive, they wouldn't have allowed me to do it. My dad would have robbed a bank before he let me live like that. And yet now I look back and I realize that was the time I found the 7 decisions that became the traveler's gift. That was the time that I met Jones. That was the time that so many things that shape what I do today, that was the time. Without that, it's a different Andy Andrews.
Andy, thank you. It's funny that you say that. I was going to share this with my team later today. We have a standing call every day with my leadership team. But in 1929, my great-grandfather lost everything he had in the Great Depression. He had a hardware store in Arlington, Texas, and he was selling Ford Model Ts from his hardware store at the time. 1929 came along, he lost everything he had, and he moved to this little town south of Odessa called Crane, Texas. And just this week on Tuesday, I really felt pressed to drive down to Crane, Texas. And so I took the 30-minute drive down south, and I sat on the corner of where my great-grandfather became a bookkeeper for a hardware store. And as you said, had you not spent those couple of years under that pier, had my great-grandfather not lost everything he had in Arlington, Texas, and had to move to West Texas where they had found oil, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation today. Right. Because it was his loss, his restart, that set the trajectory for generations now. And now, not only is my family in the 4th generation of being in the automobile business, but we're raising the 5th.
Right.
And so that very loss, and I literally, as I sat there and reflected and prayed, I really felt it come over me that that was a new beginning for us. And so if you think about when you met Jones under those piers, and you think about the lessons that you learned from him, what perspective do you think he would offer us today in all the what we're experiencing right now?
Jones would offer a proof of hope. This was my beginnings of thinking in terms of proof for people. I really don't like, being called a motivational speaker. I understand why people call me that sometimes, because they don't know what else to say. But if you look on my website, you will never see that word. You'll never see that word posted by us on social media, because I think while motivation is necessary, there's a statute of limitations on it. Proof lasts forever. And proof, you can take it and harness it, and you never got to see me again. I mean, I hope you want to, but you ain't got to, right? You can take a proof and you can use it for your own benefit. And so a proof also must be aligned with the truth, because if at any time you take a proof and begin to suspect that it's not the truth, then it's no longer a proof and it's no longer has any power. And so proofs have to make sense. And I'm not talking about a mathematical proof. I'm talking about a proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Something that just makes sense. You go, I never thought of that. Well, it makes perfect sense. Okay, so what Jones would offer, and I wrote this down. I wrote this because this is in the first book, the first Noticer book, and called The Noticer. And he said, there are people who want hope, people who long for hope, people who sometimes get hope and then lose hope. He said, and there's people who lose hope for a long time. And, our term for those people is hopeless. They're hopeless. And he said, but hope itself can be proven. And he said, curiously, it can be proven even during the worst time of your life. And he said, remember that even the worst time of your life, if you're in the worst time of your life, just remember everybody has one, right? If you look at the timeline of every life from birth to death, if you examined it, you could find a point where that was the worst time in that life. And so, who knows if something is the worst time of your life. He said, but even in the worst time of your life, there is a proof of hope. And the proof is you're still breathing. Because if you're still breathing, that means you're still here. And if you're still here, that means you haven't accomplished what you were put here to accomplish. And if you hadn't accomplished what you were put here to accomplish, that means your very purpose has not yet been fulfilled. If your very purpose has not yet been fulfilled, that means the most important part of your life, the coolest part of your life, the best part of your life is still ahead of you. You still have ahead of you to fulfill your purpose. And that's a proof that there is more to earn. There is more to learn. There's more laughter to enjoy. There's more children to teach. There's more friends to influence. There is more. No matter where you are, there is proof of hope.
Wow. Well, that's a great perspective. Thank you very much. You and I talked earlier about our boys, and you and Polly have 2 boys, and my wife and I have 3. How are you helping your boys deal with this? And then maybe on their own, how are they dealing with it? Because if there is proof of hope, if the very fact that we're still breathing, if the very fact that all these young folks in this world are still here and still part of this, what are you offering them? What are you saying to your sons? What are you saying to the young people around you?
Our age as longtime adults gives us a 30,000 foot view. I mean, we can gather perspective quickly, or at least certainly quicker than a teenager or a child, because they don't have the experience to know what happens after a crisis. Mm-hmm. And traditionally, what happens after a crisis is the crisis is solved and there's no more crisis. Right? I mean, this, I was talking to my boys yesterday and I said, Dad, how is this all going to fall out? And I said, well, I will tell you what I know. And that is that it will. Okay. I said, now, I don't know when, but they're going to come up with a vaccine and, that's going to happen. And I said, how do you know that's going to happen? I said, well, let me tell you how I know. Because we have a history, humanity has a history of solving dire problems and solving viral problems with a vaccine. We have a history of it, right? When Franklin Roosevelt said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, he said that from a wheelchair. And 12 years before, he had been stricken with polio, which is a virus born, right? And so 12 years, and then it would be 22 more years before there was a vaccine for polio. Smallpox killed hundreds of millions throughout history. Smallpox in the last 100 years of its existence killed 500 million people. And finally, they get a vaccine for it. And in 1980, the World Health Organization made this big announcement that smallpox has now been eradicated from the earth. And so through the years, just in the past century, we've come up with vaccines for typhoid, cholera, diphtheria, tuberculosis, polio, and smallpox, for measles, mumps, chicken pox, swine flu, Spanish flu, rotavirus. And so my point is, we have a history not just of solving dire problems, we have a history of solving dire problems like this. And so our guys, our researchers, the people who are on the front lines researching this, can you imagine how much closer they are to finding the vaccine than they were when Roosevelt was sitting in his wheelchair? Now they know what to look for in searching for a vaccine. They know what they have already messed up so many times on all the other stuff. And so now they know where they're going. So this is going to be solved. Now, that's just what I know, guys. That's what I said to my boys. I said, now, here's the thing. We can help in a couple of ways with this. One way that we can help is by doing the stay away from people thing. All right. That's one way we can help, because we can slow it down. We can slow that growth down. The other way that we can help is by staying calm and, not letting fear get the best of you. Because if fear gets the best of us, remember, our emotions are way over the top at that point. And I want these researchers to have both their hands on the stuff they're figuring. I don't want these researchers to have to be trying to figure something out with this hand and trying to keep everybody off of them with this hand. We want them to work comfortably and calmly. And so we have to be calm. And so we can help people, we can lead people to a calm perspective. And, one of the calm perspectives, I said, guys, I know this is worse than the flu. Okay. But I also know that, now they're projecting, the projections are that there may be 200,000 deaths in America from this virus. Okay. Now, I'm not comparing the actual virus to the flu we get shots for every year. I'm not comparing it to it. But I will tell you that 200,000 people in America die of the flu every year. So you come to your own conclusions there. And I'm not saying it's not worse, but I am just saying, get this. See, and Collin, a little side note here. I find that when I'm talking to kids and when we're talking to our kids, there are things, we know instinctively now that because I said so doesn't really matter. That's not going to help anything. That's not, we can make them do what we want them to do because we're bigger than they are and we have all the money. But if we explain in a way that they can understand and that they can comprehend, then they will take that and use that. And so one of the things I said to the boys, I said, remember when several months ago, remember when the wolf attacked somebody in the Banff National Forest up near Vancouver, and a wolf went into a campground and drug somebody out of a tent. Out of a little cloth tent, and in a campground. And fortunately, there were people around to rescue the person and hit the wolf and make him run. But as soon as that was reported, the National Wolf Foundation, or whoever they are, came out and they said, well, you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than you have of being attacked by a wolf. Now, when I heard that, I thought, well, that's just kind of funny to me because we live on the Gulf Coast. And so we know how many shark problems there are. that are not reported in the news. We hear this, but every time there's a shark attack and it's presented in the news, they come out with, you're more likely to die of lightning strike than you are. And actually, my chances of being killed in a shark attack are absolutely zero, because I've been around here long enough and I don't swim in this water. So they're never me. Now, as I'm looking at this information, I'm also finding information that tells me about what the death rate of this is and the death rate of this is. And I found something that was very, very curious. And now this number may vary 1 or 2, but I've got the numbers in my head, but it may vary down 1, up 1. But as an adult in America, did you know that you have a 1 in 85 chance of dying in a car accident? A 1 in 85 chance. But you have a 1 in 65 chance of dying of the flu or pneumonia.
Wow.
So while this is serious, we also need to be smart. And we protect ourselves like we can. We do what we can do. And we don't obsess over what we can't do. And we don't I said, guys, you know how mom doesn't like scary movies? And they said, right. I said, why doesn't she like scary movies? And they said, well, because she keeps thinking about them and she'll have a nightmare or something like that. I said, right. I said, so do you know why scary movies don't bother mom? They said, what do you mean don't bother her? I said, well, I mean, she doesn't have the scary movie nightmares or anything like that. Do you know why? And they said, no, sir. I said, because she don't watch them. She just won't watch them. Okay, so control yourself. Be careful. Our choices are determined by our thinking. Our thinking, yields the choice. We say the choice, the choices you make, they are the destiny of your life. If you want to teach your kids anything, is make good choices. But nobody ever talks about where choices come from. It comes from our thinking. Our thinking, yields choices, good ones, bad ones. But the good thing about that is you can, not only does your thinking yield choices, but you can choose how you think, right? And people say, well, no, wait, how do you choose how you think? Okay, well, think about what makes you think. Think, what puts a thought in your mind. It's generally the people you're around, what you read, watch, listen to. So you can choose how you think by choosing what you watch and choosing what you read and choosing what you listen to. And maybe more important, you can choose how you think because you can choose what you will not watch, what you will not read, what you will not listen to. You can choose.
It's a great statement. I think we were talking about that drive-through restaurant a little bit earlier. And one of the things that I've always said is that I would be perfectly happy for my kids to eat junk food because that stuff will eventually leave their body. The problem is what we put in our head sinks to our heart. And if we're not careful, it gets stuck. And it was Charles Tremendous Jones, right, who said that you and I will be the same person we are today 10 years from now, except for the friends that we keep and the books that we read. And people may not read as much today as they used to, but it's social media, it's news, it's what we watch online, it's the podcast that we listen to. And so I really echo and agree with you that what we put in our head, the danger is it sinks to our hearts. Thoughts become beliefs, and then beliefs become actions. And that's where we all get stuck.
Right. What you believe is so powerful that you can't perform against it. I mean, you can't behave against it. What you believe, truly believe, not what you say you believe, or not what, goals your supervisor made you set. What you truly believe is so powerful that you cannot perform against it. So I think a lot of times we would be better served, instead of setting goals that somebody's making us set that we don't really think we hit. I think we'd be better served by spending some time figuring out how to legitimately increase what we believe. And this, my experience teaches me to believe that there is an answer to this, and we will find the answer to this, and things will be better. And my experience also teaches me to believe that in every disaster, every crisis, some people come up smelling like roses because they figure out how to deal with it quickly. And how to deal with it quickly may be the absolute opposite of anything they've ever thought of in their life. That's what that book, Bottom of the Pool, is about. Thinking to a foundation. We saw with the hurricane that came through here 15 years ago, and you could look at this place and it looked like a bomb went off. And it's hard to find any evidence of it now. When we had the oil spill a few years ago, I mean, people closed up their shops, people closed up everything. They left, they moved to Birmingham or Nashville or Dallas or wherever. But because the oil spill, and, everybody was told it will take a generation to clean this up. This has totally changed everything. Things will never be the same, much less better. They're never, and we're living in a small town, and so there's it's a resort town, so there's charter boat fishermen. And when the oil spill happened, my boys went to school with a couple of kids that their dad was a boat captain. And, in the oil spill, he didn't see any way out and could not make the note on his boat, and went in his boat and shot himself, killed himself. And I hate even telling this story, but it makes such a huge point. There were other charter boat captains that also could not make their note. In fact, all of them couldn't. And some of them just left their boats docked, just left, walked away, moved out of town, bank can take it. But there were a few of them that said, okay, I always say, you're not lacking money, you're not lacking time, you're only lacking an idea. And so there were a few of them during that time that they said, you know what we'll do? There's so many people coming down here to see this oil. They're coming down here to look at oil. And so they decided that they would use their boats to give environmental tours. And they would pull away from the dock and go down a little bit, and they go, if you'll look to the left, you'll see some oil. And a little farther over to your right, there is some oil. A little farther down here, we're going to show you some oil. But people were paying $30 a pop to be taken around and show oil, right? And so these guys figured out very quickly, oh my gosh, I'm not spending fuel going 60, 70 miles out in the Gulf. I'm not messing with these waves, and I'm not dealing with weather. I'm making more money than I was ever making, given these environmental tours. And when everything was cleaned up, and it was, just a part of our past, those guys transitioned into dolphin boats. They now, instead of going 70, 80 miles out and paying for that gas, they stay close to shore and they take people to look for dolphins. I've got a really close friend that he does that, and he started off by guaranteeing Dolphins. You know, it's a 2-hour boat ride, and we guarantee Dolphins. And if we don't get into the Dolphins, you don't have to pay. And he has never had to give refunds to a boat. He has found Dolphins every single time because, you know, here we go, thinking to the bottom of the pool. Everybody else is just going out of the dock and looking for dolphins. But Chris got his 12-year-old involved and said, buddy, our first trip in the morning is at 9 o'clock. So I want you to leave the dock at 8 in your little skiff with this walkie-talkie and find the dolphins and then tell me where they are. And so as Chris is pulling away from the dock, you know, his boy's going, Dad, the dolphins are out off Bear Point. Okay. I mean, it's just ideas, man, just ideas, things that have never been done and just figure out how to do, because there's always something cool that is going to come of it.
It's great perspective, isn't it? It reminds me of the poem where there said there were two men who sat in a prison cell looking out their window. One saw bars and the other saw stars.
Yeah.
It's just how we look at it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And you know, it like even the hurricane around here, when Hurricane Ivan hit, it was a Cat 4 hurricane, and it devastated this part of the coast for miles and miles. And I cannot tell you how many times I heard the words, this is the worst thing that could have ever happened for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Home Depot seems to be doing pretty good. You know, I mean, I had friends who were roofers during that time who made more money than they ever thought they'd make in their life. I mean, right there is, and here's the key. The key is, can you become valuable? Can you make yourself valuable? In fact, Collin, I want you to think about this. And this is just me and you. Everybody can listen, but this is just me and you. You know, I work with a ton of companies, and I have some as clients that I you know, sign contracts for a year, and I'm available to them, all like this. And so if I looked at you, Collin, and you said, Andy, what do I do during this time? Because people aren't buying cars. Here's what I would say. I'd say, Collin, my career, I mean, yeah, I write and yeah, I speak, but what I really do is I notice things people miss, and I help people compete in a way the competition doesn't know a game is going on. And so right now, nobody's buying cars. They're not buying them from you, and they're not buying them from the other dealerships. Okay, but history tells us that at some point, they're going to be buying cars again. All right, well, buddy, this is not a monopoly game where you know, you play for a number of hours and somebody looks at their watch and goes, man, we got to go do something else. We got, and it said, so let's just leave the game here. Just leave it set like it is. Okay, and we'll come back to it at some point, and it's your turn when we come back, but leave everything like it is. That isn't what we're doing here. Now, that's what a lot of people are doing. A lot of your competitors, Collin, that's what they're doing. They think that we're all going to come back at some point, and then we'll start at the same level. Okay, but here's what I'm saying. Dude, you keep playing. You keep playing. Now, the rules have changed a little bit, but you can continue to figure out ways to be valuable to your community, to your region. You can figure out ways to be valuable. Whatever it is that you do for a living, you figure out ways to be valuable. You may not sell anything right now. You may not move product right now. You may not get new clients right now. That don't matter. Just figure out how to be valuable, because traditionally the way people buy cars is they go here and they say, what's the best price? And then they go over here and what's the best price? Well, he said it. Okay, well, then they go over here and what's the best price? Okay, but what if they appreciated the value you gave and that you provided in their lives during a crazy time in their own life. And my point is, when people come back from this, they don't have to shop around. They're just going to go, hey, I know you, I trust you. Just, I know you'll give me the best price. Just tell me what it is. Let me sign the paper, take the car, and get out of here. You create enough value for people, and it doesn't even have to be in the business you're in. And one quick story. I have a close friend who's a car dealer here in Mobile, and we go to the same camp, right? And my boys go, and they call him Uncle Joe. You probably know this guy. But when we would go to the camp, Joe would spend time with the boys. It's usually the men talking, the boys have to go some, but Joe would actually, he'd greet them, shake their hands, ask them questions, talk to them. And before long, they were calling him Uncle Joe, and so there was one Friday night that we were late getting there, and everybody was already inside eating, all the cars parked, their trucks parked around the camp house. And we had to park way away. And as we're coming in, Austin, my oldest, who was like 11 at the time, he just stops right in the middle of the little gravel parking lot. And he looks and he says, "Dad, don't you think this makes Uncle Joe sad?" I said,
I know.
"What's that?" He said, "Well, his name is not on all these trucks. The members of the club, they didn't buy all their trucks from Uncle Joe. Don't you think that makes him sad?" And I said, no, buddy, it's okay. Uncle Joe is a business person. He understands people have different tastes, and people, they want different. He's fine. And Austin said, "No, sir. They're members of the same club as Uncle Joe, and they should buy their trucks from Uncle Joe." Well, I want to tell you something. At that point, I knew that this was a guy who had competed for my son's business while the competition didn't even know there was a game going on. And I knew then, even though he was 5 years away, that when he got ready to buy his first car or truck or whatever, he already knew where he was going. There was no amount of advertising. There was no amount of, word of mouth, anything that could compete with the value that had already been placed in his life. And sure enough, Austin, he started a business when he was 13. And the day he turned 16, he walked in and he wrote a check for a 2-year-old GMC Sierra, and from that car dealership. And so I'm just saying, whatever it is you do for a living, you can compete now. You can get ahead now by doing the right thing, which is to help and be valuable. And sometimes being valuable to people, it's not necessarily mowing the lawn, or it's not necessarily giving them money, or it's not, it's not that. A lot of times being valuable to somebody can be as simple as lighting up when they walk into the room. That kind of, hey, that kind of thing. Because most people live lives that it has been years since they've gone in anywhere, including their own home, and had anybody excited that they were there. Can you imagine the value of being the only person that lights up when you see this guy or this lady and you're, hey, because it's just huge value for that human quotient.
Andy, thank you for that. One of my early mentors made a statement. He said that everyone has a flashing sign on their chest that says, "Make me feel special." And I'm reminded of the story that you just shared, and thank you. Sometimes I think the challenge that we face is that we think that giving and serving other people is a transaction, meaning that if I give to you, then you should give back to me. And I think what you're saying in many ways, and what I hope that we do as a company and our family does, is that we are going to give with no expectation of return. Now, If it comes back to us, that's a gift as well. But for us, we want to serve. And
Right.
in times like this, that's what people are looking for, I think, is what do we do to really give back to the people in our communities? What do we do to really help those who really find themselves in a position of not being able to help at all? It's interesting, and obviously she lived an amazing life of service, but Mother Teresa, one of the people who once washed her feet in a foot washing ceremony, made the statement that she had the most deformed feet of anybody she had ever seen. And they asked one of the sisters why or what had happened if she had been born with a degenerative disease that could have potentially caused that. And they said, oh no, it's very simple. When all of the shoes are donated to the orphanage, Mother Teresa goes and finds the most ill-fitting and least likely pair of shoes to fit any of the children or any of the sisters in the orphanage. And then she chooses that pair for herself. And over her entire life, what had happened from inconveniencing herself, from not just experiencing physical and emotional pain, her feet had become so malformed because of the shoes she chose to wear.
Wow.
And so, Andy, listen, as we close, thank you so much for the fact that you would give of your time, that you would share of the wisdom and the knowledge that you've shared with millions of people across the world, and that you would take an hour of your day to share with those of us, not only in West Texas, but across the United States and potentially across the globe. One of the things that we want to make available because of your generosity is that we want to make available your book and or books to our viewers. And so if any of you who are watching would like to go and have one of Andy's books, if you go to teamsewell.com/leadership, on that webpage is a button that you can push. And if you fill out that information, we're going to send it to Andy's team, and they're going to send you a copy of the book. It's for the first 500 people who go online and do that. We're going to send your information to Andy's team. And I think if Andy has a few extra minutes in the day, he's agreed that he'll sign those books for you, not personalized, but he will autograph them for you.
Yep.
They're going to mail those out to you. So that's for the first 500 people. And Andy, before we close, let me just tell everybody who's watching a couple of things if I could. Next week, Jeff Henderson with North Point Community Church, and who is also the newest author of Know What You Are For. Jeff Henderson at 9 a.m. Central next Thursday is going to join me on another Sewell Leader Live. We are going to continue to work, and I'm calling in all of my friends to try to be able to have more of these Leadership Live broadcasts each Thursday as we as a community, as the country, as a nation, and as the world continues to fight through what has become a global, unprecedented pandemic for all of us. But Andy, I'd like to say thank you again. And you and I talked at the very beginning that there was a prayer that you posted just the other day for your folks.
Just this morning.
And in addition, if you want to know more about Andy, he has a podcast called The Professional Noticer that I would really encourage you to go on and subscribe for. But Andy, as we close out, thank you. I'm going to let you share that with us this morning if we could. And,
okay. Thank you, buddy. And I'm honored to have been here with you guys. This was just posted this morning. I wrote this yesterday and was posted this morning on our Facebook page and I think on Instagram and whatever kind of gram and page there is. But this is something I felt led to write. And so you can go on Facebook and on my page and get it and pass it to somebody else if you want to. But this is, for the pandemic, a prayer of perspective. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for today and for the future being designed by this present. We know that the hardest steel is created from the hottest fire, and that the most valuable diamonds are a product of great pressure. Therefore, it's not surprising that times of calamity and distress have always been producers of the greatest people. Lord, despite all we see and hear, we vow to remain grateful, for we know that you will allow us to see the truth with proper perspective, even during this situation. Let those of us who have enough to eat during this time not forget those who don't.
That's right. Yes.
Neither should we forget that in our midst are children who have never had enough to eat. Let those of us with roofs and walls and dry places to sleep remember the 1.6 billion people in the world who lack adequate housing. Similarly, for those of us forced to work from home, remind us to be grateful that we have a home from which to work. And for those of us who are working, let us remember those who, for whatever reason, cannot. Allow those of us who are inconvenienced during this time to remember that we are inconvenienced in a country that, because of its many blessings, has a totally different definition of inconvenience than do many countries around the world. There are billions of people, and we know this, who would do anything for the chance to live at the level about which we sometimes complain. May those of us who've had to cancel vacations remember those who have never been able to take one in the first place. For those of us who complain about the shortages of medical equipment and test kits for the virus, Lord, remind us that a shortage is always better than none at all. And let us remember the times throughout history when disease swept through populations and there were no test kits because no one knew what to test for or where to even begin looking for a vaccine. Thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to live in today's world and in a country like America. Though we do not deserve your attention or your mercy, thank you, Lord, for both. Finally, Father, we ask for your blessing in the same way King David did so long ago by saying, Lord, when doubts fill my mind and turmoil fills my heart, quiet me, give me renewed hope and cheer. Amen.
Andy, amen. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, buddy.
For all of you who are watched, I would encourage you to support this amazing man, to learn from the wisdom that God's given him, and to give him an opportunity to be a blessing to others by supporting him. For those of you who are able to watch today, thank you. Thank you for being part of another week where hopefully, through God's grace, we're able to provide you great wisdom and discernment so that you can go out and be hope and light to a starving world. We love you. We're grateful for you. Andy, thank you again. God bless you all. See you soon.